Everyone, welcome back to another episode of Grow Your Tutoring Business with me, Richard Cowell. Today we've got a bit of a laying it out there type podcast because I've struggled with something over the last 5 or 6 weeks. In fact, this is something that I've probably struggled with for most of my life. And I wanted to bring it up because a few weeks ago, I recorded a podcast all about boundaries in life, boundaries in business. And I didn't like it. I really struggled with it. I'd planned it out. I thought it was going to be really good. But as I started talking about it, and what I tend to do, like when I record these podcasts, is I have an outline. I rehearse it a couple of times just to see where my mind goes and what comes up that's interesting and get rid of stuff that's not. If I start waffling, if you know me, that's pretty much what I tend to do. But with the boundary one, I found it really, really sticky to get through. And I recorded it 3 times with the intention of putting it out there until after the third one, I listened to it again and I was like, do you know what? I just don't feel very comfortable in putting it out there for a number of reasons at that point, but I didn't know what it was. This was about 5 or 6 weeks ago now. But since then, I've tried to figure out why, but because there must be a reason why I was finding this hard to talk about. And I think I've cracked it. And it comes back to something which I'm quite aware of, and something which I find really tricky, which is conflict. I tend to avoid conflict as much as possible. And when we're putting boundaries in place, what happens once we put a boundary in place, or we're getting close to putting a boundary in place, is that, well, for me, I get this fear around, like if I'd say this thing that I need to say because something's happening which I don't like, or I can sort of predict what's going to happen unless I step in early, there's going to be this conflict. Somebody's not going to like it, because usually boundaries are when people are stepping outside of or stepping through the line of what's acceptable for somebody else. So this is very much on me. This isn't about anybody else. And I think that when I was talking about the boundaries, it really felt like I was passing responsibility on to other people. Like I was almost like calling people out, which wasn't ever the intention, which is why I didn't like them. It felt like I was perhaps talking about things that had happened, and I was talking about my lived experience of putting boundaries in place, and then what the reality is, the other side of that. But something didn't sit comfortably. I feel like it's now about this idea of conflict, but actually not the direct conflict, because conflict I'm actually quite good at dealing with. It's actually the fear of the conflict in the first place that brings up a lot of weird energy. So I want to talk about that lived experience. There's also a couple of points in here that I want to mention, that it's one, it's about, we need to have boundaries in place because in our business, because otherwise it's unlikely to go very well. Like you'll say yes to things you don't want to say yes to. Perhaps you'll allow things to happen in your business that you don't want to allow in the first place. So we do need to have boundaries in place, but also understand that if we are finding it tricky with the boundaries, that we don't have to have like immediate decisions. There are ways to open a conversation to really reduce the amount of fear that we have. But a lot of the time, it's just about going through the experience of it and understanding that actually the other side of that fearful conversation is actually generally okay. But the earlier that you deal with things, the easier it is. Now, I'm really early on with this myself. So this is why I'm kind of laying it out there for you to listen. And also there'll be questions as we go through, because I'd really like to hear whether other people experience this. My guess is that it's a yes. However, some of you will be a lot better at that. You'll probably feel the fear and then do it anyway, almost like trusting the process, or leaning it. I know a lot of us are kind of a little bit more woo now. So we'll probably say something like, we're just going to let the universe take care of ourselves, right? Or take care of us, I mean. And then we're going to have that conversation. So it's almost like just trusting the process. It is what it is. We need to have these boundaries in place. Let's move on and beyond it. So let's talk about my lived experience. Let's actually talk about this in the context of business. But I think in particular with the Facebook group that I run, like there's been a lot of times where I've had to sort of go, oh, I don't like this, but I don't want to have the difficult conversation. I'll avoid it as much as I can. And then what happens is we allow things, or have allowed things to happen, that has then led to major conflicts in the business. And that's my fault, because I didn't step in early enough to say, do you know what? I actually don't like this part of what you're doing. And therefore, Now it's led us down this path where you're not allowed in the group anymore, which seems like really silly now. I look back, there's been a couple of times where somebody's come and advertised in the group. And I've kind of gone, okay, I can see why that's useful to the community, but it's in direct conflict with what I offer myself. And I've kind of should have had that conversation and just gone, do you know what? That's direct conflict. I don't like it. If you want to advertise to a big group of tutors, you're going to need to go and grow your own, because this has taken me a long time and I've invested a lot in myself so that I have the necessary skills to for this to happen, to hold this space. And for you just to come in and advertise what you offer, that's not okay. It should have been a conversation like that rather than you're banned, which is what I did. And I giggle about it now, not because I want to sort of brush it under the carpet, but I look back and think like how immature, right? So what would we say to a child in our classroom if they're behaving that way? We say, well, do we not just want to explore or ask a question first? Do we want to lay down the rules to make sure everybody clearly understands where we're at? And then after that point, if it happens again, well, you knew, and you still did it. So now there's the more severe consequence. So I feel like because I avoided those conversations, I've ended up sort of breaking up relationships with people. I mean, potential business relationships with people unnecessarily. And that's all on me, just because I didn't want to have that difficult conversation. And then even then, I didn't have the difficult conversation anyway, because I just went, no, you're out now. But don't get me wrong, like I'm not apologizing for having those boundaries in place, because I do mean what I've said. It's taken a lot of time and effort and investment in myself so that I could grow a group like this. And it is part of a business that I run. So let's sort of flip this around a little bit. Let's put it onto your tuition business. It would be similar to you growing your Facebook page to having sort of 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 followers and potential clients. And then me as a tuition business owner coming onto your page, knowing you've got this amazing amount of parents following you and advertising my tuition services. That's not okay. And I think like so I understand why I need to have boundaries, because this is what I mean about us having boundaries in our business. You would not want that to happen. Well, in fact, I've seen this in the group recently where somebody's put a post out in, say, a local Facebook group about their tuition business, and then other tuition businesses are not copying, are posting underneath about their services. It's like, that's not okay. Well, it's not okay for me. That there are values that I hold. That's not something I would do. And this is where the push comes, that other people don't hold the same values as you, and they don't have to. But it's up to you to maintain those values for yourself. And the way we do it is important. Well, for me, it's important. I want to be more open to having those difficult conversations. They're probably not that difficult. And this is me going down that kind of spiral and saying, well, look, before I have that conversation in my mind, I sort of play it through. I think I've spoke about this before. Does anybody else have those imaginary conversations in their head, which is just rehearsal, but then it spirals out of control? Like perhaps you start catastrophizing it. I certainly do. And I think, oh no, they're not going to like me anymore, or it's going to go this way, or they're going to say this thing, which is really hard, and I'm not going to know how to respond. And therefore I avoid it. But actually, the only thing that really happens is that you upset yourself, because their feelings, although we do care, like I'm not going to say we don't care, although we do care, we don't want to upset people unnecessarily, but we need to make sure we protect what we've grown ourselves and also protect like our own personal values. So I think there is always going to be a push there in business. And then it's like identifying what are the potential conflicts and how do we want to deal with them? Similar to how I teach sales, like what are the objections? If a parent's going to phone you up and want tuition from you, they're likely to have some objections of some sort. So we spoke about this recently. I did two in the course. We do two sessions around sales, and the first one is about looking at how we can set up early on, like give a lot of information out so that parents have as much information as possible before they even pick up the phone. Therefore, when you get when they've messaged you or they're speaking to you on the phone, most of the objections they have been answered up front. There will always be more. Like, and for some parents, that'll be enough. And then they'll just phone it up and go, "Oh, read your website. I've seen all of your posts on Facebook. We're really interested. How do we start? Is there a trial session?" They'll ask all the usual questions. You'll ask them questions because you'll want information. But essentially, you're kind of dealing with most of the most important objections up front. And then in the second day, we talk about those objections a little bit more. We talk about rehearsal. We talk about making sure we've got answers to some of the trickier objections. And when a new objection comes up and it throws us off, which again is likely, we can rehearse it. We can say, right, that's a new one. What's my answer for this? Can I do any new content that would help a parent understand this upfront so that we don't have to have that conversation over the phone? Also, it helps because if someone phones up and they've got a ton of questions, you can go, look, I can see you don't know much about this. And I want to make sure that when you chat to me, we can have like a really much deeper conversation. All of this information is on my website. All of this information can be found on my Facebook page. I'm going to send you some links. Go and watch this video. It explains everything. Phone me back. Now you don't have to use that. It's just me giving you an example of how you can serve up front. It's similar with our boundaries as well. Like we want to get there nice and early. We want to serve up front. So if somebody is sort of stepping over the line, what's the conversation or what's the question that you need to ask? What's the statement that you need to say that will just help them understand that they're stepping over the line or this is the boundary? And you do this really early on so that it doesn't build into something that is really scary, or perhaps it is a breakdown of that relationship, or you are going to actually upset them because it's been confusing along the way, because you might have allowed some stuff somewhere that you didn't want to allow because you were fearful of the conflict. And then when it's pushed to a point where you're like, you've got to step in now, the response is going to be something like, well, you let me do that, and then this isn't allowed. I just feel like this is really like muddy. And so it becomes very kind of like a gray area. It doesn't become completely black and white. And it probably should be. It probably should be. So that my fear around like the boundaries is really about that kind of conflict. Look, we shouldn't apologize for having boundaries. I think like they really serve us. So let's consider like what our boundaries are for our business. Like for example, what are the potential conflicts that we could have, like even with a parent? I'm talking about my Facebook group mainly, although there are conflicts within my tuition business. Most of the time, it is dealt with early because it needs to be dealt with early because you're working with families, children, young people. You can't let that stuff slide. So get in there nice and early. If a parent is questioning something, or they're pushing you a little bit. Perhaps they are keep delaying payment, or they're asking you for something that's not included. Like I hear this a lot. Like they want me to mark their homework. They want me to set some writing challenges. But I know that if I do that, that's going to take me 5-10 minutes to mark every single week. And if I do that over the term, that's an extra hour. And also it's a different thing that I didn't include in the first place. Maybe you don't even want to do it. Set your ground up really early on. Or you say, I really want to do this actually. It's a really good idea, but I can't do this for free because of, and explain it, and then see what happens. And push it back. What are the big conflicts when we are running a business? It's with like, whether it's business to business, like I offer from my Tutors Who Thrive business to tutors, whether it's through a course or whether it's the one-to-one program support or whether it's the membership. It's usually like maybe that people want to barter, which is fine. I don't mind that. I actually don't mind if someone comes back to me and says, look, I actually really want to do this. Would you accept? Now, then it's up to me whether I accept it or not. But I think sometimes, like, we're not very good at bartering in the UK. We don't like it. So it's like, well, no, we definitely don't want to work with them. And yet, actually, it's probably just a conversation saying, look, no, the price is the price. Let's go back with a question and say something like, is price the main reason or the main point of decision making for you? Is budget the number one priority? Because if it is, I'm probably not the tutor for you. However, if you do want my service, this is how much it costs. Whereas I see advice in the group where people go, no, get rid of them. It's a massive red flag. I don't think it is a massive red flag. I don't think it is. It's just that we're fearful to have the next conversation to say, well, actually, no, it's just the price. I don't, and if you go to a different country, it's part of their culture. Most of us are travelers. Not everybody's like traveled around the world. I mean, I'm quite new to it. But when I was in Morocco back in October, it was weird if you didn't like say, and that was in all shops. It wasn't just like in the markets. It was every single shop you went to. You pick up something off the shelf and you go, "Oh, can I have this for half the price?" And they'd often go, "No, but this price." And you'd buy, you know, it's just the norm. So for some people, it just is. How you accept that and how you deal with it is your decision, right? So you can just say, what's a red flag? But are you losing a potential quite good customer just because we're afraid to have the next conversation? So there's a boundary in there and a value thing. So just to sum this up, like, although this is very new, it feels very fresh and raw, and I'm looking back and reflecting on how I've dealt with some of these things that have happened over the last few years, and I realize I've dealt with them quite poorly. I want to be better at it. So how do I do that? Where do I need to put the work? Where do I need to put some energy in to make this feel a little bit better? So it's not about boundaries, it's about the conflict. The boundaries are quite solid. I'm really clear with myself. I'm really clear with where the boundaries lie and what I want to achieve because I've got vision for the business. That's where that comes from. Makes decision making really easy. But let's put emotion back on the table. It's not quite as simple as just saying, well, here's my vision and these are all the decisions I'm going to make. Because when we start actually acknowledging how we feel about some of these things, that's how we can get blocked. So I don't want us to be blocked by fear or scarcity or being people pleasers. We need to be able to break through that into the next stage or next phase of who we need to be. So some of the work I've been doing is around understanding why that conflict is tricky or the fear of conflict is tricky. I've done some of that work and I do understand. This is not something I can share yet, but now I've started to understand where that's coming from. I can go back and say, well, what's fact? What's not? What am I making up? Now, what I'm definitely not making up is how I feel. That's coming from somewhere. But if I can channel that or block that in some way and acknowledge that, well, I know I'm feeling this, but I'm feeling this because of this particular incident in my life or continued incidents in my life, I can begin to understand and unravel it all and go, actually, this is not as bad as what I'm making out. I probably still catastrophize that conversation in the early stages because, you know, that's got to be a work in progress, but I'm far more likely to open up the door and then see what happens. Often we just need to create a safe space for ourselves so that we can have that conversation. And that's kind of where I'm at with it right now. And what I'm hoping by doing this podcast with you out loud is that I'm then going to be able to open up the door to talk about boundaries properly, because boundaries are important and we need to look at what they are for us individually, because and there are really obvious ones. Like, for example, you don't want people to come and advertise in the space that you've created, and it causes a massive conflict of interest. That's the same with me. That's a really easy boundary to say, right, this is it, you're not allowed to do this. But it's far more harder to do that at an emotional level when you're trying to sort of people please or you're worried about what people think. But it's quite an easy one to put in place. But we need to understand where that comes from as well, which is actually from us creating a vision and strategy for our business. Right, anyway, I'm going to leave it there. This will lead into almost like a part two. Like, so we're going to start with this, which is conflict and dealing with conflict. And a part two will be boundaries. I will come back and record that probably with one or two other people, because I think it's good to have a conversation around this and not just be like me and my views. And the reason for that is because we all come from different perspectives and have different starting points or different values that we bring to the table. So to hear like a number of people talk about it would be quite useful. Right, go and enjoy the rest of your day, whatever you're doing. And I'll speak to you all really soon. See you later. Bye-bye.